Welcome to the final Advanced Bereshit for beginner shiur. This week we reviewed some of the key topics from our series, including the destruction of the first creation and the tension between destroying a broken system and God choosing to relate to a specific individual. We explored the nature of the fruit of the tree of knowledge from the lens of Professor Leon Kass as tied to the morality of nature. We touched on topics such as neoteny and proposed a textual answer to why no one ate from the tree of life. Finally, we saw how the moral degradation of humanity was experienced, kavayocho, by God as sadness, and discussed how to get back to Eden, or what can be described as the beating heart of the perfect and beautiful world. Thank you for joining us. Chazak, chazak, ונתחזק.
Apparently,
Okay. Apparently.
apparently, I heard that there was some kind of class about Judaism here tonight.
Yes.
Something.
Yeah, we're gonna do some stuff.
Oh
Okay.
wow.
So we will start with a quote, Kadarkenu Bakodesh. This is a Zen koan. A monk asks Kagon, "How does an enlightened one return to the ordinary world?" Kagon replied, "A broken mirror never reflects again. Fallen flowers never go back to the old branches."
That's pretty depressing.
Well, we're going to contrast that with this shiur. So first of all, Mazel Tov to everybody on completing Parshas Bereshit in depth. It's been a while since we had a siyum, so I wanted to just do a little bit of chazara. Hopefully, we'll have a few more new ideas to cover. This year, we've actually covered a lot of ground. We did Daniel, we did Sefer Ezra, Ezra Nehemiah. We took a little break and did remarkable poskim, unusual psak. We did Shir Hashirim, and now Bereshis. I think it's auspicious that we finish Bereshis like literally right in time for the completion of the Torah, and then we're going to be starting with Bereshis again on Sukkot Meretz Hashem. But I think there's also a little bit of an envelope structure to our learning. We started with Daniel, and there we talked about this idea of you are what you consume, and I think in Bereshis we saw a little bit about the roots of that, if you'll forgive the pun, and how that plays out in the world. So what I'd like to do is go through chapter by chapter and just do a little chazara of some of the main topics or ideas, the highlights that we covered. So we'll start with the first parak, and if you want to follow along in the Chumash, we can do that as well. But we talked about the language being symbolic or semiotic in terms of this not being a story to take literally in the most literal sense. The Torah is not here to tell you history. The Torah is here to teach you ideas of how to live the life that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to live. And so if there are conflicts between what we understand happens historically versus what the Torah tells you, it's less relevant to us because that's not the intent of the story, right? We talked about this concept that Stephen Gould, the late professor of biology, explained called NOMA, which is an acronym for non-overlapping magisteria, that the role of science is to tell you what, and the role of Torah is to tell you so what. Okay, now that I've told you what the parameters are of the physical reality, how should you behave? How should you relate to the reality that you're presented with in a way that is godly, in a way that connects you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and so you can live in His world. We talked about the fact that the Torah is written as a story. It doesn't have to be written as a story, right? The Code of Hammurabi is just a list of do this and don't do that, and if you do it, here's the punishment. The Torah is not that. The Torah is story, and we talked about the missing first pasuk in Bereshis is Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, right? Moshe is the narrator of the story, and yes, please.
Yeah, I actually just read in Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks's book on the Parsha. He brings this point out. He actually says by 2 weeks ago, Parshat Kitavo, he says the mitzvah bikurim is like it brings out this point that it's not just a book of laws, and Moshe is like Moshe is not just a lawgiver. Moshe is a storyteller, and by us, every Jew bringing the Bikurim and saying the Aramaean was my father, and he's saying he's making us into a nation of storytellers. That the whole idea is that narrative is baked into our national DNA,
I love
and
that.
and he goes into it really in depth, and like I wanted to show it to you directly, but I forgot to bring it.
Okay,
But like,
that's
but
fantastic. Well,
he really keys into that idea that this is the most effective vehicle for getting people to connect
yes.
with the central ideas that are espoused in it, rather than
And we know it's true neurologically. It encodes differently in the brain to hear a story than it is to just, if you
yeah.
tell someone a grocery list, they're not going to remember it in the same way that you're going to remember a story that you can dig into and learn lessons from and be a part of.
Right. A good leader tells the best story. A great leader turns his people into
Yes.
storytellers. You know, a great
Yes.
people turns his people into leaders. You know.
Right. I like that. Stephen, what were you saying?
I said we got it to Levinson.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. For sure. That's what Pesach is all about, is being part of the story. So we looked at Bereshit and broke it down into three categories of threes, right? We broke the days out into, there is the location, the occupants, and then the rulers, right? So we had Shamayim is the first location. So the occupants of Shamayim are the heavenly bodies, the stars, and the whatever's up in the sky. Welcome, welcome, Bakasha. And then the ruler of Shamayim is the sun and the moon, or eventually just the sun, right? Then the next the next part of the triad is the next location is water, right? So the water is the location. The occupants of water are actually twofold. There is the Mayim Elyonim and Mayim Tachtonim. So the fish are the occupants of the Mayim Tachtonim. The birds are the occupants of the Mayim Elyonim, and we explained that that's one of the discrepancies between what we understand happened historically, evolutionarily, that birds couldn't have developed before land creatures, right? But when the Torah is looking at birds as an example of the occupants of Mayim, so then you're going to list birds before land animals, even though they historically came after land animals. The third location is land, and the occupants are obviously everything that lives on land. And then the ruler, the ruler of the water kingdom is the Taninim Hagdolim. That's why they get singled out. That's why they get a blessing. And then the ruler of the land is man. And they also get singled out, they also get a blessing, etc. And we talked about the fact that when you view it schematically like that, the outlier is the seventh, is Shabbos. That's the one day that doesn't fit into any of those categories. And then obviously the ruler or the Shabbos, the category there is time. And we talked about how everything else in creation revolves from a time perspective around the cycles, right? It's either the solar for the year or the lunar for the month, but the week has no natural phenomenon that corresponds to it, because it's above time, and that's why Kadosh Baruch Hu is connected to Shabbos. Okay, that was very briefly the first chapter. We mentioned that the first chapter doesn't end with the first chapter. We ignore the chapter breaks because they're Christian. Really, the end of the first chapter is Shabbos, which is the beginning of the second chapter. And Shabbos ends with this idea of Vayichulu Hashamayim, Vayichal Elokim, and we talked about that language of Vayichulu is a language of destruction. In Megillas Rus we have Machlon and Kilion. So Kilion is a lashon of destruction. There's a pasuk in Yechezkel also that uses that same lashon of Kala to talk about destruction. And the idea being that we have a lot of midrashim that tell us that this happened. That there were 907. First of all, Hakadosh Baruch Hu was Boro Lomos Umachrivam. He made worlds and destroyed them. There were 974 generations before the world, and God destroyed all of them. It really functions in almost a klalu pratu klal, that you have destruction, then you have creation, and then at the end of the 6,000 years, there's also going to be 1,000 years of Shabbos, right? And those 1,000 years of Shabbos is where there's not going to be creation anymore. It will again revert to tohu vavohu, the same way it had started out. And we mentioned that idea that at the end, right? God, we have the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. God wanted to make the world with strict midah hadin, and he saw the world couldn't survive, so he had to combine it with rachamim. The first story that we get is just that midah hadin story. There's no personalization. There's no interaction. Creation doesn't do anything. It just exists, and so it can't have a kiyum, and that's why we get rid of it and we move on to Parak Bet. And the fact that the first creation was destroyed helps us alleviate any conflicts between the first story and the second story. If you don't read the first story the way we described it, then you have all these contradictions of when were things made, and were man and woman made together, or was there first man, and all these kinds of discrepancies between story number one and story number two all go away if there is no more story number one. Okay, so when we got to Parak Bet, we talked about man being created kind of as a golem, and we saw that Gemara about Rava Bara Gavra, and how there was some play with language over there. We contrasted our garden with the garden in Shir Hashirim, and we asked, who is, so Adam is given a job, right? It says Vayikach et Adam asher asa, that God took the man that He made, and we asked, well, who else? What other Adam is there? And then He puts him in the garden, la'avdo l'shamra, to guard the garden. Who's He guarding the garden from? And then finally we came to this idea of what is the Eitz Hadat, and we talked about this concept from Leon Kass about it really goes back to the Daniel idea that you are what you consume. That the Eitz Hadat is a alternative mode of morality, right? You have God's morality, and then you have nature's morality. And if you base your morality on nature, so it's radically different. It's something that human beings naturally recoil from when you see the natural world and the things that go on there. And we gave some examples from the arachnid family, but you can look at really any part of nature and how it operates. And what is okay or normal or natural in the natural world is not okay for human beings, right? We look at that as not our basis for morality, but at the same time, where does our basis come from? It comes from the Yetzer Tov and the Neshama, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us, and that's really the morality that He wants for us. But when you consumed the Eitz Hadat, now you've integrated that. So now you have this conflict. When you want to do something that is giving into your baser nature, your natural instincts and tendencies, and you have that conflict of, well, I know I shouldn't do, but I really want to, eat the piece of cake or do the thing or whatever that Yetzer Hara is. That conflict comes from which source of morality is going to be my guiding, North Star. Am I going to listen to nature and do what, might makes right or what feels right or whatever, or am I going to listen to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And that's sort of the conflict that arose from eating from the Eitz Hadat.
What was the comparison to the active family?
So we gave an example of how different spiders, how they lay eggs and tear
All
apart
the brothers
these.
eat each other.
Yeah, there's all kinds of if you. One of the examples that Stephen Gould gives is that there was some, I think it was a Catholic who left his fortune to a university to endow a chair in seeing the beauty of God's world and how nature tells us to be good people. And they tried for years to find stuff for to fill the curriculum, and they're like, what are you talking about? Everything that happens in the natural world is just awful. It's true. The Gemara talks about if we didn't have the Torah, we could learn sneas from the cat, but those are behaviors. It's not morality, right? Cats are vicious to mice, and they're not nice moral animals. Okay. Anyway, so we moved on to chapter number 3 with the snake. So there we talked about the snake being the representative of the kingdom of water. The snake is the Taninim Hagdolim. There are other times in the Torah where the snake is referred to as a Tanin. And essentially the problem that the snake had is what we ended up calling, welcome, corporeal election. That the snake didn't understand why man was treated different. And I think we pointed out from Rabbi David Silber that if you look back at the first parak, all the animals are allowed to eat only of the vegetation. There's one animal that's allowed to eat from the fruit of the tree, and that's man. So snake is what is going on? Why are you treated differently than the rest of us? And that's what leads him to sort of want to tear down mankind, because he's the ruler of the kingdom of water, so he's going after the ruler of the kingdom of land.
Who's the water?
The snake, the Taninim Hagdolim.
Chosenness. That's the first place where chosenness.
Right. That's really we didn't name it as such, but yeah, that's eventually what we'll call corporeal election or being chosen just for the sheer will of God choosing, that really originally shows up with Adam and humanity being treated differently than the animal kingdom.
Theoretically, we could be a race of sea lizards, and man could have been like the dude in the Bible and been like, hey, there's that tree over there.
Right.
It could have been the other way around.
We asked why they didn't eat from the Eitz HaChaim, right? If they, if they're going to decide to eat from the Eitz HaDat, then go grab some Eitz HaChaim, stick it in your pocket, and have the antidote before you have the problem. And we pointed out that it seems from the Psukim likely that nobody knew that there was an Eitz HaChaim. Not the snake, not humanity, because God never tells anybody that there is an Eitz HaChaim. He tells us, the reader, and so when we read the story, we assume the characters know what we know, and it's important to kind of keep that framework in mind. You're reading a story, and not all the characters have perfect knowledge. God tells us, the reader, that he makes an Eitz HaDat and an Eitz HaChaim. He doesn't tell Adam, Chava, or the snake, or anybody else, and that's why he's not super urgently worried that they're going to eat from it, but they might eventually, stumble upon it, and that would lead to problems.
Why do you say that?
Why do I say?
That he didn't tell him.
Because there's no indication from the Psukim that he did.
There's no indication that he didn't.
He tells them, Mikol Eitz Hagan ochal tochel, and Mi Eitz Hadat don't eat from. Welcome. So then where did we get to? Oh yeah, so the sin, right? So and I couldn't move. We all know why you're here.
Guy likes the smoke.
So we asked why they sinned with their mouth and they cover their genitals, right? We talked about how
I don't remember the answer.
Okay, so we'll get back to it. So we talked about how dat is connected to maturation and that whole process of going through puberty, and a person's dat actually changes, right? Lahalacha, a katan, someone who hasn't hit puberty yet, has no dat to the point where their kinyanim don't count, right? I don't think we covered it really by Cain, but that's part of what underlies the whole concept of Cain. Cain, when he's named, it's kaniti ish es Elokim, right? That I acquired a man. So the essence of Cain is related to kinyan, and that's why Cain wants to make sure that he has a dat relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when he says, I'm not going to be connected to you, there's a breakdown in dat there, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. But where we got to with why they covered their genitals is not just that they've now experienced like a change, a psychological change, but that the species mankind has gone through the end of what we called neoteny, that evolution prefers species that, or I shouldn't say prefers. There's an advantage to species that can maintain their childlike or their early developmental stages, and we compared wolves and dogs, right? That mature adult dogs act like the child form of a wolf. They bark a lot, they socialize, they do all the things that baby wolves do that adult wolves don't do, and they were bred for that, right? That's part of the selective process, and mankind also has those same qualities. There's part of the reason that human beings don't gestate for as long as they're supposed to, right? Deer come out, dolphins come out, and they're ready to go and do whatever they need to do, and human beings don't because they're underdeveloped. They basically spend like the first 6 months of life finishing their development cycle, and human beings have that whole childlike adolescence that most animals, most species don't. That
gestation process for a deer.
For deer?
Yeah.
I don't know how long the gestation is.
Saying it's longer than human.
No, what I'm saying is deer don't need to gestate outside. Once they're born, they're ready to go. When a human baby is born, it's like entirely useless, right?
Like a kangaroo.
You can't even use it for a football. I mean, honestly.
Excellent example.
That's just legality. That's being recorded.
Yes, and published. Okay, let's move speedily along to chapter number 4. a little secret, which I will only share with you. Chapter 4 is my favorite chapter. We talked about Cain, Ayn Rand, and Michael Wishograd. We asked why God doesn't respond to Cain. Right, Cain is the innovator. He's the first one to come up with a korban. He's trying to repair the whole breakdown. Adam Arishon, there's a breakdown in the land, and Cain works the land, and then he innovates. He takes the fruit of his labors, and he offers it up as a korban. And God's like, "Wow, that's amazing." It's like the two best things together. It's the two best things together. It's cholent and whiskey. Like now is one
You want me to
chefsa.
grab napkins?
How much green juice have you had?
I just wanted to like thinking about.
Okay,
It's smoky. It's good.
there might be some tissues in the.
I got it. Go.
So we asked, we talked about what Cain was trying to accomplish, and we asked why God doesn't seem to respond to that, right? That it's almost the opposite. God shows up and he's kind of gaslighting Cain, like, "What's the matter? Why are you so sad? You know I'm so sad, right?" First of all, Cain is the firstborn, so the firstborn is the Bechor, which means he's the Kohen. He's the one that's supposed to be offering up the korban, and Hevel copies him, doesn't innovate, takes his job, and then offers up mi bechorot sono. He offers up the Bechor as his korban, and God's like, "Yeah, that's the one I want. I don't want the other one." And again, this really essentially goes back to corporeal election. That God said, "I want who I want, and I don't want who I don't want," and there's not going to be a reason for it. And it's hard. It's a hard thing for people to deal with. It's a hard thing for humanity to deal with. That the Jewish people are an Am Nivchar. Yeah, it's hard, but.
I've been wrestling with this idea since we discussed it so many weeks ago.
So what he tells Cain, that whole mysterious pasuk in Tetiv Se'eit is that you Cain wanted instant fix, right? There were Adam Arishon made a problem. You want to immediately undo the problem. You bring a korban problem over. Let's usher in the messianic age. God says that's not how it works anymore. You're in a world of process, and now you have to go step by step through the process. So Cain says, "Oh, I understand. We're not fixing a break in the system. This is a broken system." And according to Ayn Rand and the Nachash and Cain, what you do with a broken system is break it completely, right? You have to completely upend the system. So the only way that Cain saw to do that is to kill Hevel. Not because he doesn't like Hevel. He might even love Hevel, but Hevel is made b'tselem Elokim. So if I want to undo the system, he's the best person for me to take out. If I'm a Kohen and I kill somebody, I'm now not able to do the avoda anymore. Cain has unmade creation. He's unmade the Tselem Elokim. He's unmade his ability to be a Kohen. He's undermined the whole system in trying to pull the whole thing down. So we pointed out a lot of the similarities between the sin of Adam and Chava and the sin of Cain. There's a lot of similarities in the way the story is set up, in the language. The only difference, the reason the stories are set up to be so parallel is to call your attention to the one difference being that Cain mentions sin. He confesses that he sinned, and that's the beginning of Teshuvah, and that's why God walks back the whole. Why doesn't Cain get killed? Because he confessed that he did a sin. So God now shows him, okay, there's room for there's still room for you. You can instead go into exile, which is mechaper. Yeah. It's the beginning. It's the beginning of that. You're right. It's not a great teshuvah. We have to wait till David HaMelech shows up for like a really good teshuvah. And then from Cain, we saw the rest of the breakdown of humanity. We got to Lemech, and we saw that Lemech wanted to sort of be the opposite of Cain, naming his kids all with the shorish of Yovel. Yovel being the opposite of Nav Nud. Yovel's a return home, and Cain is all about Nav Nud, and that he doesn't have any sort of permanence. And then we got to the third generation is Enosh, and that's the beginning of Avodah Zarah. You have a perplexed.
That's just my
Okay.
resting place right now.
I don't think we got into it very deeply, but the Rambam traces the beginning of idolatry to the generation of Enosh. That originally, according to the Rambam, the way idolatry started is that the way you show honor to the king is by showing honor to the emissaries of the king. So if the sun and the moon are the emissaries to make light, then I will worship them, not because they're a deity, but because they're the emissaries of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And eventually people forgot about the whole process, and they just worshiped the emissaries minus the king. There's a lot of problems with that, but we'll leave that for a different time. Okay, moving speedily along to chapters 5 and 6. Okay, so in chapter 5, we trace the sort of spiritual genetic line, starting with Adam Harishon, going all the way down to Noach, and then we mentioned how at the end of Parshas Noach, you get all the way down to Abraham. We tried to explain why that story, the Eila told us Shemayim, Zeh Sefer told us Adam, is a more important or fundamental idea than Rabbi Akiva's idea of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, because it really shows you that everyone comes from one source and that we're all part of that Tselem Elokim. We talked about the Bnei Elohim, and the Nephilim, and the breakdown of sexual propriety that they followed the same pattern of Vayar. They saw something that was Tov, and they took it. That really starts with Chava when she sees that the tree is good to eat, and she knows she's not supposed to take, but she takes anyway. The Bnei Elohim are the same way. They see something is Tov, they're not supposed to take it, they take it anyway. I don't think we pointed out the time. There is one part of the story of Bereshit where someone sees something is Tov and doesn't take it. Any takers? Notice the pun there. God, Parshas Bereshit. God in the whole first parak sees everything is Tov. He doesn't take anything. The only time God takes is when he sees something is Lo Tov. Lo Tov liyoda adam levado. It's not good for man to be alone. So then he takes the rib and he builds Chava. Right?
Again, what if Hashem doesn't have to take anything? Like,
right, but the word of the Torah.
What I'm trying to show you is that the Torah is contrasting the language that God takes in order to fulfill a lack, and humans take because they want.
In order to fulfill a lack.
No, to fulfill a perceived lack. It's not really a lack.
Okay.
They're choosing. I guess maybe a better way would be to say that they're choosing to make it a lack rather than it being in reality a lack. But
no, Hashem made it a lack.
No,
because they weren't supposed to have it.
That's not a lack.
All right.
Alas and a lack.
Okay. Where do we get to? Right. So finally, okay. So the end of the sixth parak was that society had degraded to the point where it was completely irredeemable. We talked about Vayisatsev Hashem, that Hashem is described Kavayachal as experiencing the same atzuv, the same sadness that Adam and Chava experienced as part of their curse. Right. Then the next step was for him to say, okay, let's destroy the whole thing. The only thing that redeemed this, again, broken system was the choosing of Noach. And we talked about that choice not having anything to do with Noach being a tzaddik. It was just because God chooses. And it started with Adam, and it went through Noach, and it goes eventually to Avram, and it's still not sitting well.
I don't know if I want this necessarily to be published on Spotify.
Then you have to save it for the after party.
I'm just saying, from a Jewish philosophy perspective.
Yeah.
If you want to go with the fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom just chooses, how do we know he didn't choose Jesus and left us in the lurch?
That's a great question. That's exactly what they claim.
Exactly. So if we say that the Rebbeinu Shalom just chooses,
the answer to that is once you're chosen, there's no unchoosing.
Right.
There's no unchoosing.
They state that we were unchosen, that God rejects us, and now he's going with the Christians. But
the
it says in the Torah,
generation to generation picking people.
No.
Right? And then Avraham, he picked Avraham. And then from Avraham's kids, he picked Yitzchak.
Yep.
And then from Yitzchak's kids, he picked Yaakov.
You can't say that the Torah was deleted and we don't have to keep the Torah anymore and all that stuff.
He says in the Torah that you're the chosen people. There is no unchoosing. We've tried. The Jewish people have tried for generations to be unchosen. And we're chosen for better and for in difficulty. We didn't quite get to this point, but Noach eventually redeems a lot of our story. At the end of Parshas Noach, he comes out of the teva and he plants a vineyard, right? And that is the first time where you get wine. Unfortunately, it doesn't work out too well for Noach. I don't know if people are familiar with this. When someone makes kiddush, so they say Savrim Ranan, and people answer.
Right.
Why do they answer L'chaim?
Because when you have a condemned criminal,
The
People used to choke on it and die.
That's interesting. What you're mentioning is the Medrash. The Medrash says there's nothing as terrible as wine that has caused people to do all kinds of terrible things when they're drunk. But there's also nothing as amazing as wine that you can use for kedusha. So when you make kiddush, you say savrim ranan. What are you savur? What do you hold? Is this l'chaim or lamaves? So everyone says this wine should be l'chaim. That's Noach is right there on the precipice. It could.
People should be l'chaim, not l'mav.
Right.
That's correct, because people used to die on it.
People would die in it, but they're also saying
So
this
Didn't they give
wine
the
itself
criminals
has,
the wine before they?
that I don't know. Oh yeah, I'm
Also,
sure.
the
That's what
Tana
it's-
who the Laura, I'm not sure whatever, got drunk on Purim, kills.
Ruzera, yeah.
Like, whoops.
Yeah.
But the idea being that this is the first time that something has been produced from the ground that can affect kedusha. We in the entire story of Bereshit, we have no kedusha. We don't have any act of humanity that can reverse things.
Not the korban.
Not the korban. It doesn't describe it as kadosh.
Uh-huh.
Wine is the first time where you get something that has the ability to take the whole and bring it back to kedusha, to reverse that whole process.
Rangers.
Now, the way it does that is by removing das. I mean, we're not going to get into a whole Purim shiur over here, but essentially that's what Adal Yada is about, right? It's allowing the wine to have that psychotropic effect on your das, remove the das, and bring you back to that world of kedusha. What's that?
Break down the walls.
Break down the walls. Okay, so we asked one final question that was really the end of the Shir Hashirim series, which is, okay, now we've gone through Bereshit. We're out of Gan Eden. Why did nobody try to go back? Right? Do you remember this question?
Yeah, but then the answer was.
The answer was, what's that?
That's exactly what we're doing.
The answer was that's the rest of Bereshit and really the rest of history is us trying to go back, but that going back is to go back to Eretz Yisrael. That's what Gan Eden really is for the rest of the Chumash. I want to sort of add to that a little bit. There is innate in the stories that we tell and in the feelings that people have that there is this perfect world that people are trying to get to. There is a very poignant TED Talk that I would like you to indulge me in for a few minutes. No, not mine.
Mars.
Oh, not Mars. Not no. Nice try. No, he's following along the status updates. That talks about the beautiful world and has some very nice allusions to Rabbi Nachman. So if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, I'll put it on right now. But I think we can say Chazak and turn off our recording and